Hello, everyone. This is Laurie Smith on Spreaker. I'm glad to be here. October is the National Domestic Violence and Abuse Awareness Month, and that's what I'm here to talk about tonight. Just did a show over at Blog Talk Radio with Lindsay Tolson, and that was great. It was an hour show, and we were talking about domestic violence and abuse, and really promoting awareness and education, regarding domestic violence and abuse. And I like this song. This is a World of Beauty from the Deliverance, and I like the Deliverance, and I'd like to get a hold of some of their music when they actually, when I can find it. World of Beauty, makes me wonder who I am, he says, like that's what abuse does. It takes away your identity. That's what Lindsay Tolson was talking about on my show. You lose that sense of who am I? Um, what is this? What is this life? What is this world? I grew up abused, and I grew up in a home full of domestic violence and abuse, and my mother would quite often say, even though she was my main abuser, she was also abused as well, and my mother would say things like, I don't even have a name, like who am I? I don't even exist. I'm a non-person. And that's what abuse will do to people, not just women, but anyone who's abused, and just completely, dehumanized, degraded. It's absolutely horrific what abuse does to people, and yet, we see, that there is work being done. There's just people out here talking about this stuff. There's organizations, not-for-profits and whatnot, that are working really hard, to promote awareness and education regarding violence towards anyone, whether it's men, women, children, domestic violence, child abuse, you name it. And there's shelters out there, there's help out there, but it's limited. And the fact is that so many people slip through the cracks, and so many people will not get that help. So many people will die. And my main goal, really, along with so many others out here who are speaking out against this stuff, really is to say, look, this is a wake-up call. Like, when are we going to wake up? When are we going to get this changed? When are we going to change this? Well, it's going to have to change, really, ultimately, with people's hearts, men and women's hearts, like the way that they treat each other, the way that they treat their children, the way that they treat their families. If you're in a domestic violence situation, you make sure you get some help. You first of all, you dial 911. If your life is being threatened, you get some help. So many times my mother's life was being threatened and nobody phoned 911. And, my parents were brought up on child abuse charges, so it's not like anybody was going to call the cops when we were being abused. There was no help for us. And sadly enough, this is how I grew up, and this is my world, right? And so, as an adult, I've been able to make a nice life for myself, really abuse-free life, and I did that on purpose, and it was my choice. And so, I made the right choice for myself, but so many people won't. And we were talking about that on my show earlier, on Blog Talk Radio, that so many times people will continue to live in these situations, being abused, and just allow themselves to be abused and mistreated in every way, whatever kind of a relationship it is, whether it's just boyfriend, girlfriend, or, partnership, or marriage, right? So many times people will stay in that relationship. I actually lost a friend to domestic violence. One of my friends was killed and murdered by her boyfriend, a long-time boyfriend who was, they were common law, and they had 2 children together, and their 2 children were under the ages of 5. One was just a baby, one was just a toddler, a 2-year-old, and the other one was about 3.5. And so these little babies were going to grow up without their mother. They're never going to know their mother. And it's so sad. My friend was killed, and she was just brutally murdered, by her boyfriend in domestic violence assault. And she grew up abused. We all grew up abused. We all knew that was our life, And I changed the cycle. I broke the cycle. I just chose to as an adult, to have an abuse-free life, which is great. But a lot of my friends didn't do that, and so they ended up in some really horrific situations. And so many people will not get help. And there's you have to be very careful if you're in a domestic violence situation. You have to be very very careful about getting help, because many times people's lives are actually, people will be killed and murdered trying to get out. And so you need to talk to someone who has that information. You need to talk to a professional, like somebody who can actually help guide you through the process of getting out, and what you need to know about getting out, and what you need to have ready and prepared, in advance to get out, of an abusive relationship. But whatever you do, you make sure that you tell somebody and have, something set in place. Don't just allow yourself to be killed and murdered thinking, well, who am I anyway? And so many times people who are abused, if they're abused in childhood and they're abused all the way through their life, and then they get into an abusive relationship, they figure that that's their lot in life. That was my mother. My mother thought that was her role. That's all she ever knew. She grew up abused. She was abused her whole life as a child and grew up horrifically, really, by my grandmother, who was a murderer, who murdered one of my uncles when he was 16 and a half years old. She killed one of her sons, and so she was an abusive tirade of a woman, and my mother um, grew up under this and then abused me. So the cycle just passed on. Well, abused all of her children actually, but mainly me. And so the cycle just passed on, and that's the way it goes in many families. The cycles will just pass on, and people think that this is life. People think, oh yeah, this is life. This is what it's all about. It's because it's not exciting enough to live a life where somebody's not slapping you in the face, or somebody's not punching you in the stomach, or kicking you, or throwing you down, or insulting you, or whatever it is. So many times people who have been abused, life isn't exciting unless there's some sort of dramatic thing going on. That's how I grew up, because it was always a crisis. There was always a crisis in my home. Somebody was always getting hurt. Somebody was always hurting somebody, and somebody was always going to get hurt and threatening to hurt somebody. And so, and there was always some sort of craziness going on. There was murders and suicide. And I mean, my family was very violent, very destructive, and that's how I grew up. So when I became a teenager, I looked for that type of thing outside of my family also, because I couldn't just go do something normal like join a sports team or something. I wasn't set up for that. I was set up to do drugs and to drink and to get myself into all kinds of trouble. And so that's what I did, and I just followed suit and self-destructed really through my teenage years all the way until I was in my 20s. And then when I was in my 20s, nothing was ever really, I wanted to get out of that abuse. I wanted to get out of the violence. I wanted to get out away from that psychodrama of people hurting me and slapping me in the head and punching me in the face and, kicking me around and beating on me. I really, for the first time when I was about 21, 22 years old, wanted to get out of that. I was like, I don't want to live a life like this, Like I don't want this, I got really tired of it. And finally, like I had some situations growing up after I was abused up until I was about 17 physically. I was hanging around with a lot of my friends were all abused as well, and really all of them. And they were all we were all drug users, and so we were all pretty violent. And there was a lot of situations of domestic violence just within the friendships that I had, that I used to have to protect my friends and try to save my friends' lives, and I'd end up getting beaten on and punched in the face. And so I was beaten as a child and abused as a child, and then also violently abused by other people's boyfriends trying to protect them, right? And so by the time I hit 21, 22, I was like, I just want a peaceful, normal life, to be treated with dignity, to be treated with respect, which I had never had in my entire lifetime. And so, I really fought for it, I really did. Like I fought to, first of all, to not kill myself, which took me, the better part of 20 years until the age of 41. But during that 20 years, let's say 20 to 41, those 20 years, I really worked on trying to show respect as well as to get respect, So in order to get respect, you got to show respect. So then I started to realize that, man, I really want to live a dignified life, a life without abuse. I don't need somebody slapping me in the head and punching me and beating on me, cursing me, spitting on me, throwing me out of the house, just abusing me horrifically, sexually using me. I don't need that, Like what I need is dignity. I need a hope. I need a good life, a decent life, And my mother, she lived the same lifestyle I did, and she was even sexually abused, obviously, by my dad, who was raping her. And she was abused her whole life, like in every way, and so was I. And my mother was my main abuser, so there you go. But she used to sit around and she used to say, "This is all it's ever gonna be. This is all it's ever gonna be." And my mother was in her 50s when she was saying that. Because my mother was 38 when I was born. I was the last child born, and she had so many children before me. So there was 7 of us that lived, but there would have been like 10 or even maybe 12 children if they would have lived. But there was 7, and so in a period of 18 years, there was about 12 children, but only 7 of us made it. And so 7 children, over a span of 18 years. By the time I came along, my mother was 38, so you add 10 years to that. By the time I was 10, my mother was 48, and she was beating the shit out of me. And by the time I was 15, my mother was 53, and she was still kicking my ass and beating me and, spitting on me and throwing me out of the house, which was just one of her favorite things to do. And so, my mother was 53 years old. She was quite a bit older than I am right now myself. And I remember being a teenager sitting around listening to her. My mother was suicidal, and she used to always be talking about killing herself or killing me or killing somebody, killing my dad or whatever, and or killing herself, right, quite often. And she was manic depressive, right? And she would just say, this is all my life is. Here's this woman at the age of 55, 53, 55 years old, sitting around saying, this is all life is. Well, you know what? I decided I didn't want to be that way. I was like, I'm not going to repeat that. I'm not going to repeat what my parents did. And so, see, if everybody would break the cycle of abuse, right? All of us, we have to do that. Anybody who has the tendency to want to abuse, because abuse is a choice, right? It's also a learned behavior, but it's also a choice. We can choose not to do it. We can choose not to abuse other people. We can choose not to abuse ourselves, right? And this is what I finally did. And it's taken me my whole lifetime to get where I am here today. And it's not an easy road, it's not an easy road at all. It's not an easy thing to wake up every day. You know what I mean? Like with the knowledge that I have, I wanted to kill myself at the age of 10 years old, and I pretty well planned my suicides and was pretty sure that I would succeed, long before this. So I'm still here. I'm still here every day, waking up and saying, no, you know what? I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna do it. I'm winning this fight, And this fight wasn't even started by me. This was a fight that was started by my parents. The cycle of violence and abuse and self-loathing and just horrific stuff that abuse will cause. And so, it's my fight. And if everybody would do that and stop the cycle of violence, stop the cycle of abuse, we could stop abuse of all kinds. We could stop abuse. If people, that's why, I mean, I'm always talking about stopping child abuse. That's my main thing. And, if people would just stop abusing their children, like we could all go do something else, or somebody else's child. It's not just always parents. But if people would stop abusing children, period. Doesn't matter who they are. If abusers would stop abusing children, we could all go on and do something else. That would be great. And then no more children would be abused. Abuse is a choice. People choose to kill, maim, torture, beat on, kick around, sexually use their children or somebody else's child. This is a choice they're making. No one's forcing them to do this. My parents, when they did what they did, they were perfectly in they weren't in their right minds. They were both crazy, but they were not on drugs. They were not drinking. They were sober. They made a choice to hurt their children, and then they loved it. They laughed, and they thought it was great. My parents were very sick, very, very sick and twisted. And so, this is it's really what I would call just the evil intent of the heart, And people need to stop abusing each other, and people need to stop abusing their children. And it's not just women who are abused, men are abused as well. And, children, boys are abused, children. It's just ridiculous that people continue this garbage on. So if you're in that lifestyle, there is a better way. If you're in that lifestyle, you don't have to remain there for the rest of your life. I'm so glad that I figured that out when I was 21. I got off the drugs and I stopped that violent lifestyle at the age of 21, 22, pretty much right in there. And I started to make a life for myself, and it took me another 21 years just to decide not to kill myself. So it's a long road, but you know what? It's worth it. It is so worth it. Because, I treat people with dignity, and so therefore now I'm treated with dignity, And I changed this for myself, and you can too, and we all can. But we have to make sure we get some help, right? So if you're in a situation where you're being abused, you make sure that you get some help. First of all, call it in as a crime. Abuse is a crime. It needs to be reported as a crime. Call 911, make a report, and then follow through with whatever you got to do. But make sure you save your life, because not everybody else is going to do it for you. And so you have to want to save your life. You do count. You do matter, right? And so, remember that domestic violence and abuse and child abuse isn't going away. And the more we talk about it, the more it brings it out from underneath the carpet where it's always being kept. So make sure you make some noise. Make as much noise as you can about child abuse and do whatever you can to stop this mess, right? Have a great night, everybody.
is meant to